Day one of the Sean Combs criminal trial was definitely eventful. Aside from compelling and revealing opening statements by both the prosecution and defense, the jury heard the first witnesses in the case. Everything from Astroglide to alleged paid sex work to explicit text messages, Diddy wearing a disguise, the rapper being pushed up against a wall. This is your definitive recap of everything that happened inside of that courtroom today. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, it is here. Today was officially day one of the federal criminal trial of Sean Diddy Combs. From Cassandra Ventura's lawsuit back in November of 2023, to the plethora of allegations and other lawsuits, to the raids on his properties, to his arrest and indictment in September of 2024, to his multiple attempts to seek bail, to several superseding indictments, May 12th, 2025 marks the day the jury was finalized, opening statements began, and we heard the first witnesses, the first witness testimony in his criminal trial. Remember, this is a trial where federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York assert Combs engaged in sex trafficking, racketeering conspiracy, transportation to engage in prostitution, that he established this network, this enterprise, this pattern of criminal activity that was particularly engaged in the abuse of women. Now, we're going to plan to do daily recaps here on Sidebar every day of this trial if we can. Because as you know, federal courts don't allow cameras or recording devices, but we want to provide you enough details and description so it feels like you are in that courtroom watching it play out. This is a high-interest case. This is an important case, and we feel it is only right that we try to provide you with as much information as we possibly can. So right now, we are going to lay out day one. Jury being finalized, opening statements, the witnesses who testified. So for that, I'm going to bring in Law&Crime's reporter, Elizabeth Milner, who is in that courthouse today. Elizabeth, so good to see you, as always. First things first, okay, and I want to let you go because you haven't even eaten today. I know there's been so much going on today. So first things first, what was it like today getting into that courtroom? I understand you had trouble getting into that courtroom. What was the scene like?
Oh, well, Jesse, I got here super early, a little bit like around 7 o'clock a.m. this morning. And thankfully, we had somebody kind of holding a place in line for us because that's how many people want to be here, want to be inside that courthouse, want to be inside that courtroom, whether it's the general public, whether it's journalists, whether it's other lawyers just wanting to get a piece of the action. Let me tell you something, Jesse. When I came here this morning, the line was all the way down the block, and it was just crazy packed with so many journalists, so many people who just wanted a chance to, again, be inside that courtroom today. But it was just a madhouse. Like a lot of us in the media were kind of comparing it to the Hunger Games. It was really that serious because a lot of people wanted to make sure, one, that they had their place in line, and two, that they were able to get inside in their same place in line, because obviously with this being such a high profile trial with a lot of eyes on it, everyone wanted to be inside that courtroom. So there were some times people were cutting the lines, people were trying to get ahead, they were, trying to get up in any way possibly that they could, because, when the bailiffs take us up to that courtroom, they're taking us in maybe packs of 6 or 7. It's never like the full group and then the rest are turned away. But there are some people who try to sneak in with the group that are going up. But, the bailiffs, sometimes they catch it, sometimes they don't. But then, us who have those press passes were able to kind of glide right through. But then there were, still a packed courtroom today, especially for day one, especially for a very high profile day, that being opening statements. But it was crazy just to even get inside that courthouse today.
And I followed you on X, and you took a video of Rodney Lil Rod Jones, who filed his own lawsuit against Sean Combs. He showed up today. That was something, to say the least. I mean, was he in the courtroom at all? Were you surprised to see him? What was he doing?
I was a little surprised to see him kind of standing in the line, just, like the rest of us. He came in probably, I would say, a little after maybe 7:30, like it was right before 8, because around 8:30, they started bringing us into the court house. But, I was kind of stunned to see him inside that line with all of us. He came in, he had the sunglasses on, he had 2 chains on, not to be confused with the rapper or anything like that. But, a lot of cameras were inside his face, and through his attorney, he had pretty much said that he is not going to be making any type of comments, not going to be giving any type of interview. So we didn't see any of that while we were standing outside the courthouse, because remember, for our viewers, we're not allowed to have our phones inside. As soon as we walk inside those doors, for the most part, the marshals, the bailiffs are telling us to turn our phones off. And so once we all got inside the courthouse, I saw him kind of standing in line with his attorney as well as his entourage, going up with members of the public. And so probably for the first half of the day, I did see him inside that courtroom. He was paying attention. He was following along with, the preemptive strikes of the jury selection, as well as the opening statements. And then around lunchtime, not kind of clear where he had went afterwards, or if maybe, had no idea where he went pretty much afterwards. So, in this afternoon, I didn't see him in the courtroom, but for this morning, we definitely did see him inside that courtroom, along with his attorney as well, too.
Okay, so before we even get into the opening statements, before we even get into the jury being finalized, who was in the courtroom for Sean Combs? Were there any notable faces? And how did Sean Combs appear?
Well, he appeared, in good spirits, considering that today is a very big day. It was day one. It was opening statements. He was brought out a little bit before 9 a.m. He was wearing a gray sweater. He had a white undershirt on. He had gray slacks. He had his glasses with him. He waved at his family, kind of gave the little heart sign as well, too. He stood up at the defense table. He was sorting through papers. But one thing I found pretty interesting today, Jesse, is that we could see him reading the Bible. And this was before the preemptive strikes were going on. And so maybe this was, to get him into the good spirits. Maybe it was because he needed, maybe some religion or that type of thing. And so, yeah, a lot of us kind of spotted him with the Bible. At first we were like, is that a Bible? And then when he got up, put it inside of his, his legal briefcase or whatever he brings inside that courtroom, then we're like, okay, yeah, that was definitely a Bible. But as far as some memorable faces inside that courtroom today, it was really stacked. We had Mark Garagos in the courtroom, Karen Agnifilo, who is the wife of Mark Agnifilo. We had Lil Rod inside that courtroom. We had Doug Wigder inside that courtroom, and he's a notable face because he represents Cassie Ventura, who is expected to testify tomorrow. We had Quincy Brown inside that courtroom, one of Diddy's, he's Diddy's adopted son. We had Justin Combs. His mother, Misa, was inside that courtroom. We had Christian Combs, Delilah Combs, Jesse Combs, Chance Combs, Janice Combs. That's going to be Diddy's mother. We had Dana Tran inside that courtroom. Dana is also a pretty notable figure, too, because she is the daughter of Diddy's youngest child, Love, who I think is maybe 2 years old, 3 years old at this time. So obviously, the baby wasn't in the courtroom or anything like that. Then we also had the twins' caregiver / guardian. She's also Kim Porter's best friend as well, too. And so those were some of the pretty big notable faces that we saw inside that courtroom. Now, I did hear rumblings that both Lisa Bloom and Gloria Allred were also inside the courthouse today. I believe that they were in the media overflow room, which is pretty surprising given, their, credentials especially. But those were the main noticeable people that were inside that courtroom today.
I think we're at a point right now where we know a lot more than we did 10 years ago, and we have to be thinking, what exactly are we eating and drinking, right? Look, I'm very particular about what I put into my body, and let's face it, shopping for healthy food can be quite overwhelming. So many choices. It's tough to know what's actually good for you, but that is why I'm so pumped Thrive Market is now sponsoring Sidebar. So Thrive Market is a go-to online grocery store for getting healthy essentials. I'm not kidding, they make healthy food shopping so easy. One of the things that I love is their shopping experience, because as a Thrive Market member, you can customize the assortment of products in just a few clicks based on your preferences and your dietary needs. So whether it's gluten-free, keto, something else, you can filter the products to get exactly what you're looking for. Like instead of me chomping on candy all day, I found these amazing organic avocado oil chips. Perfect for that midday craving. Also, they're super eco-conscious with all products shipped from their zero-waste warehouses. Everything is delivered straight to your door. You don't even have to leave the house. If you're ready to make healthy food shopping as easy as a few clicks, check out Thrive Market. Scan the QR code on screen, click the link in the description, or head to thrivemarket.com/sidebar to get 30% off of your first order and a free gift when you join Thrive Market today. Disgusting sex acts, a wild scene, and extreme violence. Day 2 of Sean Combs' criminal trial saw the beginning of the long-awaited testimony of Cassandra Ventura, the star witness of this case. We bring on Law&Crime reporter Elizabeth Milner, who is once again in the courtroom, to give us a sense of what exactly happened today in court. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, the second day of Sean Diddy Combs' blockbuster sex trafficking trial unfolded with Definitely gripping and often harrowing testimony from his former girlfriend, Cassandra Ventura, who took the stand as the prosecution's star witness. For nearly 6 hours, she testified. And I'm going to tell you right now, what she testified to, based on what we were reading in that courtroom, it was something. It wasn't just alleged psychological torment, physical abuse, sexual exploitation at the hands of Sean Combs. Now, remember, she is coming in there, 8.5 months pregnant, coming in after the testimony of 2 other witnesses. There is a lot to get into. We're going to give you a comprehensive breakdown of every major moment from today's proceedings, because as you know, there are no cameras in that courtroom. There is no audio of what happened. But we got the next best thing. We got Law&Crime's reporter Elizabeth Milner, who was inside that courtroom witnessing firsthand everything that happened today. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on. I know this has already been an exhausting day, particularly about what you heard in that courtroom. We will get to that. Before we even get into the testimony, real quick, is it just insane out there again? Are we seeing tons of people, reporters, spectators? Just tell us what the scene looks like right now.
The scene honestly kind of mirrored day one, which was opening statements. You know, day two was really no different. A lot of people trying to get inside that courthouse, a lot of people trying to get inside that courtroom, especially for the big testimony that we were all expecting today. Of course, that being Cassie Ventura taking the stand. And so it was a lot of people just trying to kind of weasel their way in through. I was able to get inside that courtroom really just with a luck and a prayer and also a little connections, which always helps in this case. But really, it's just madness over here at the courthouse. I mean, there's media campouts just extending across the block. A lot of public interest in this case as well, too, from people who just either want to get a glimpse of either Diddy, his family, just be inside that courtroom, just be inside the courthouse, even if they're in the overflow room and able to kind of watch the proceedings that way. But there's definitely a lot of interest in the case, and I don't expect that to die down even throughout this week.
No, and this was expected with Cassandra Ventura taking the stand. Now, before we get to her testimony, the day actually started with finishing up the testimony, the cross-examination of Daniel Phillip. That is that male escort, male performer, I should say, who began his testimony yesterday. Talked about how Diddy allegedly paid him to have sex with Cassandra Ventura, all while Diddy was not only watching but recording. And this happened to have, apparently happened several times. Again, Combs is charged with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, transportation to engage in prostitution. So we're talking about coerced sexual performances. Key witness here. Elizabeth, what came out of cross-examination today of this witness?
Well, the cross-examination was continued by Xavier Donaldson, and it was interesting to kind of see him in action even yesterday as well as today, because he's a little feisty when it came to this particular witness. He was essentially questioning him on, returning to the Gramercy Park Hotel. Why was Diddy sitting in the corner? Why did he notice that specifically? He was asked about what was going on while he and Cassie were having sex. Donaldson asked, did Cassie take the lead? He says, he being Daniel Phillip, said they both did their thing. He was asked, was Cassie drunk? Daniel Phillip responded no. Was Cassie high? Daniel Phillip responded no. Did Cassie pay him or pay for a hotel? Daniel Phillip responded saying he just didn't know. They were talking about the alleged assault that had happened at Cassie's apartment, something that Cassie herself had even testified about as well, too. And so essentially a lot of these questions back and forth were just pretty much to kind of get clarity. There were some points in the cross-examination I was kind of like, where is this going? But maybe from the defense's perspective, they were essentially trying to make that argument that Cassie she was coherent. She wasn't under the influence of any type of drugs or alcohol when these freak-offs were occurring, or when these encounters were occurring, I should say. What was interesting about Daniel Phillip when he had actually walked into the courtroom, something that a lot of us in the press kind of noticed, is he walked inside with his sunglasses on, which, for the most part, we haven't seen many witnesses do that. I mean, only 3 have taken the stand so far, but it was definitely an interesting moment. I mean, earlier this morning, it wasn't raining just yet, but, it wasn't exactly sunny too. So we were kind of like, why is he wearing sunglasses? And even when he got off the witness stand, he put the sunglasses right back on, and just walked out of the courtroom. But another interesting point, Jesse, that they were kind of talking about today was talking about an incident, or not even an incident per se, but talking about a moment in December of 2023. And this is when Xavier Donaldson brought up Daniel's friend named Malia. And essentially, they were questioned, or Daniel Phillip was questioned about when he saw Cassie outside of the Dream Hotel here in downtown New York City. Apparently, Daniel Phillip had told this friend Malia about his relationship, and I put that in quotations even here in my notes, about his relationship with Cassie. Said that Cassie asked to call him later on to meet her. The defense says it was for another experience, and Phillip said no, that wasn't necessarily the case. The defense said so Cassie called for a one-on-one after she wasn't with Diddy any longer. And so then another interesting point that was brought up was just that Daniel Phillip had met with federal prosecutors in March of just this year, so just a couple months back, and they were talking about essentially kind of what one thing I kind of remember from Daniel Phillip's testimony is just kind of the way he would talk about Cassie per se. Like, for example, yesterday he had said that Cassie was one of the most beautiful women that he had ever seen. He had also said had Cassie given him a chance that he would absolutely date her. So it seems like he kind of had more on his end, more of a platonic feeling towards Cassie, especially kind of in that need to kind of protect her. So, Phillip said that, Daniel Phillip, said that he wasn't necessarily jealous seeing Diddy have sex with Cassie, but he had allegedly told federal prosecutors that he was in October 7th of 2024. And this is where a sidebar had happened. And so after the sidebar was over, Daniel Phillip was questioned again, would he feel jealous because he had liked Cassie romantically? And so Daniel Phillip said he didn't recall saying that to prosecutors. And so when the redirect happened, Maureen Comey just really kind of had to redirect all of the cross-examination, all of the back and forth, kind of back to a focus. So she asked, about Diddy directing and why that wasn't brought up necessarily. Said that Diddy had directed Cassie to give him, oral, rub baby oil on him. They were asked, Daniel Phillip was asked about money, given more money for sex, $3,800 more than he would be if he were to come over to dance, or for time, I should say. He said he was paid anywhere between $700 to $5,000, $6,000 just for sex, and then essentially he's paid $0 if he didn't have sex with Cassie or in the room with Diddy. And so, during the redirect, Daniel Phillip said Cassie normally didn't respond to his text messages, but then there was a point that, after Diddy had beat Cassie, that Diddy was actually trying to get Cassie to continue to perform sexually with Daniel Phillip, and said that Daniel couldn't get an erection after kind of hearing the slaps going on in a nearby room. He said he essentially just wanted to hug her because he could tell that she was shaking and that she was afraid, and that pretty much reaffirmed that Diddy beat Cassie essentially, and even called her the B word. And so then they were talking under the recross. He was asked again about, text messages that he said he didn't receive responses to. And then some of the exhibits were showing that, Cassie had responded very casually to some of those messages. So some of those were pretty much the big takeaways from Daniel Phillip's recross, redirect, recross. And so, and then that essentially wrapped him up as a witness. He was off the stand probably within an hour of when court had began, and he put on his shades and just walked out of the courtroom. It seemed like Diddy was kind of, obviously he was listening at every single witness who had taken the stand thus far in this case, but definitely Diddy had his eyes on Daniel Phillip, was paying very close attention to what he said, again, participating very much so in his defense by jotting notes down, handing them off to his attorney, listening to Xavier Donaldson do the cross-examination and even the recross as well too. And so definitely Diddy's eyes were very laser focused on this witness and the following witness too, who we all know to be Cassie Ventura.
Hey, I want to take a quick minute to thank Upside for sponsoring our coverage of Sean Diddy Combs' trial. Now, Upside is amazing. It is a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries. I pump my gas, I can use Upside. I go out to lunch, I can use Upside. Maybe I get something at a convenience store, I can use Upside. And why not get cash back when doing all these things, right? And yes, this is actual, real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you transfer right into your bank account. So once you have the free Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card. You follow the steps on the app, you get get paid. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen, and make sure to use our promo code LC Sidebar. You'll get a special one-time offer of 35 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code LC Sidebar for a one-time special offer of an extra 35 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas.
The third day of the explosive sex trafficking trial of fallen music mogul Sean Diddy Combs, and it delivered even more bombshell revelations as one of the government's key witnesses, Cassandra Ventura, better known as Cassie, Diddy's former girlfriend and protege, remained on the witness stand. She detailed years of alleged abuse, coercion, and the dark reality behind the so-called freak-off parties, and visual evidence is being shown to jurors. How did Diddy react to testimony in court today? What were the emotions of the courtroom? And what could a cross-examination of Cassie look like? Welcome to this special edition of Sidebar presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart in for Jesse Weber. We know it's being reported on from the outside, but to help us get an inside look at everything that is happening inside the courtroom in the Southern District of New York, I want to bring in our Law&Crime reporter, Elizabeth Milner, who was in the courtroom once again today. Elizabeth, thanks for taking time as court just wrapped. Just first up, what was the mood in there today, day two of Cassie being on the stand?
Well, definitely the mood was just, again, kind of like it was for day one of Cassie's testimony. A lot of people were anticipating what is going to happen today, what more is our prosecutors going to go over with Cassie. And really today was just kind of a summation of her entire 11-year relationship with Diddy, who she refers to as Sean whenever she's testifying. But as far as today, the mood kind of, it was a little different inside that courtroom. It was, part two of her direct examination. We thought that there would be a point where we would get to the cross-examination at some point today. That's not happening. It's going to be happening first thing tomorrow morning. But as far as just the mood in general, Cassie comes in today. She's wearing a long gray dress. She did something similar that she did yesterday, where she just walked directly to the witness stand. Her family was there to support her. Those family members included her mother, her brother, and her husband, Alex Fine. Meanwhile, on the other side of the courtroom, you have Diddy's children. Now, it was a little different than it was yesterday in that his daughters weren't present. And I was actually told by a source that they weren't present for a reason that, it's a reason for a lot of kids. They were there for graduation. They have prom coming up. And so that is why they are not in the courtroom. And that is why they're no longer in the city, actually, because they're flying back home to attend to those types of activities. But so for the most part, those who were there to support Diddy today were one of his associates, his sons. That included Quincy Brown, that included Justin Combs, it included Christian Combs as well as Diddy's own mother, Janice Combs, who was inside that courtroom. So really it was, you had on one side Diddy's family, you had on the other side Cassie's family, who was accompanied by Cassie's attorney as well too. And so that was kind of the mood that was set today. Now, even when Cassie had walked inside that courtroom, Diddy, for the most part, from what I saw, kept his eyes on her, saw her when she had first entered the courtroom, saw her as she walked up to the witness stand. Meanwhile, Cassie, from what I could see of her, didn't really pay much mind to the defendant or the defendant's family. Again, she just made kind of a beeline to the witness stand. And again, she was back under oath. And so, for the most part, she definitely kept her composure. There were emotional points throughout her testimony. I'm sure we'll talk about more in depth in just a second. But for the most part, that was just the general mood of the court, thinking that we were going to get to the cross, but it was still another day of direct examination. And at this point, it seems that Cassie won't even be off the stand until the end of the week.
Now, before we get to that testimony involving Cassie today, Elizabeth, I understand there was a little bit of some drama between the prosecution and the defense. What happened?
So there were actually arguments outside the presence of the jury before the testimony restarted this morning. So even outside of the presence of the jury, Cassie is not on the witness stand. Her family wasn't in the courtroom when these arguments were happening. But essentially, from the defense's point of view, they wanted no communication between Cassie and her attorney whenever she would be under cross-examined witnesses to do. So essentially, the defense, from their point of view, said that it's not an issue about emotional support, whereas the government, in their argument, was saying that the witness should be able to kind of consult with her attorney, under the assertion of privilege, a lot of legal jargon, a lot of legalese there. But from the defense's perspective, they were just concerned about Cassie and her lawyer being able to consult with one another on the testimony, and kind of how that would even happen is, she is a government witness. They were concerned that the government would tell Cassie's lawyer something, Cassie's lawyer would refer it to them while she's under cross-examination. And so they were just a little worried about that. Now, as from the government standpoint, and Maureen Comey was making this argument today, she essentially said, whenever she is talking with the attorneys of the prospective witnesses, that they're really just kind of talking about logistics. They're not talking about testimony. They're talking about transportation. They're talking about security. They're talking about, when Cassie presumably can leave the courtroom, who will follow her out of the courtroom, security and logistics. And so those were one portion of the arguments. Another big argument that was made this morning prior to Cassie restarting her testimony were just marked exhibits from the defense. From the government's point of view, they said that the defense was not producing their new exhibits. They thought that these exhibits would be shared all the way back in April, which was just a few weeks ago, and said that their goal is not trial by ambush. Whereas the defense says, they are marking a tremendous amount of exhibits, some of these exhibits even, in the government's possession. And so these the category about these exhibits were pretty much text messages between Sean Combs and Cassie. And the defense was saying it was pretty much unfair if the government can prepare a witness with these text messages. They said, marking exhibits in response to direct testimony, they can hand over the exhibits essentially around the time cross-examination starts, whereas the government was making the point that they wanted these exhibits now. They wanted them pretty much ASAP. Again, them pointing back to the fact that these had to be turned in by April, and we're already in trial right now. We're in testimony right now. And even from the judge's response, he was kind of a little like, why are you just bringing this up now while we're in trial? If this was an issue and you didn't have them before the start of trial, why didn't you raise that issue before? And then we could have handled it in this matter, so that way we're not holding up the jury. And so that way we can get the day started. So that took about a good 30 minutes of just back and forth between, the defense and the government. And essentially the conclusion was just that these exhibits would be turned in around the cross-examination time. So a time that the government could soon be getting these exhibits, so that way they can mark it, possibly re-ask these types of questions under redirect. And that's why, this testimony is taking a little bit of time, because there's just so much intricate pieces, from both sides that, they just want to make sure, again, all their ducks are in a row for the most part. But it seems like from the defense's point of view, they'll hand over the exhibits, just not when the government initially wanted to.
And another person involved with Cassandra Ventura, Alex Fine, who's her husband, father of her children. And first off, you just think of what it must be like for him listening to the testimony that we'll talk about in just a moment of what his wife is saying on the stand about her relationship with Sean Diddy Combs. But what possibility is there that Alex Fine could actually testify at this trial?
From the defense's perspective, it seems like it was kind of a strong possibility. And I say the defense because the defense plans to call him as a witness to kind of impeach his own wife's testimony, which is something that you don't really see every day. So this argument was first brought up just yesterday. And essentially this kind of was about the time frame around, 2018 time. So essentially from the defense's perspective, these arguments were brought up yesterday, and this was just about the testimony that was going to be brought in, something that was even talked about today, and this was about an alleged rape that happened in 2018. And essentially from their point of view, they were saying that Alex Fine allegedly threatened Diddy for the most part. They said that that Alex Fine threatened Diddy about Cassie demanding this $30 million, threatened to beat the F out of Diddy. Those were the words that were used in court yesterday. And the defense says that they want to call Alex Fine as an impeachment witness. And the government said, for the most part, that he should be allowed inside that courtroom while his wife is testifying, while his wife is there on the stand to provide emotional support. And I will even say, sitting just a few rows back from him, you could kind of feel the tension just between him and Sean Combs, not from Sean Combs' perspective, but more so from Alex Fine to Sean Combs, where he looked visibly upset, in my opinion. He looked like, that he was just, reliving this testimony and going through this testimony in extreme graphic detail. It just seemed like he was very upset of, why did you do this to my wife? This is somebody that I love and I want to protect her. It definitely seemed like it was kind of a protection mechanism, or maybe it was just, his, natural reaction. But you could kind of feel just during some of that testimony today that there were some tense moments. But back to these arguments outside of the presence of the jury that happened yesterday. So the defense says, they wanted to exclude him and get him outside of the courtroom when this alleged rape was in 2018. It was talked about during her testimony. So for the most part, during the duration of her being on the witness stand, he did stay in that courtroom, as well as her brother, as well as her mother, and her attorney as well too. But then when it came to this testimony about the 2018 party that had happened at Cassie's brother's house, and then we're talking about the alleged rape that had happened also in that same year. And that's a big year too, because that was the year that Cassie called it off with Diddy, as she had said. But so when they were starting to get into that 2018 time frame, I did see Alex get up out of the courtroom, walk out of the doors, and he didn't come back for the rest of her testimony, mainly because of these arguments that happened outside of the presence of the jury yesterday.
Day 4 of Sean Diddy Combs' sex trafficking and racketeering trial got intense in a hurry as Diddy's ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura faced a blistering cross-examination, with defense lawyers using old love texts and steamy messages to challenge her claims of horrifying abuse. From freak-offs to jealousy to burner phones, it all came out in court today, and I'm going to be speaking with our very own Elizabeth Milner to get the inside scoop, including a major witness who's set to take the stand next. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. The fourth day of testimony in Sean Diddy Combs' sex trafficking and racketeering trial turned explosive as his former girlfriend, Cassandra Ventura, faced quite aggressive cross-examination about her tumultuous 11-year relationship with Combs. The defense pushed back hard on Ventura's allegations that she was coerced and abused by the fallen mogul, showing jurors old text messages and emails where the two appeared to exchange loving words, even some pretty explicit plans for their so-called freak-offs, raises the question of consent or not. So to give us that up-close and personal account of every single gripping moment that happened inside that courtroom, we're going to bring back on Law&Crime's reporter Elizabeth Milner, who is in that courtroom once again. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on. So set the scene for us. What was the atmosphere in that courtroom like today? Was it tense when we're talking about cross-examination? Did it feel different than direct examination?
Yeah, for the most part, this was a day that a lot of us were anticipating. A lot of us were wondering, what is the defense going to have when it comes to this cross-examination? The last couple of days, while Cassie's been under direct examination, to me at least, just kind of watching her tone, watching how she answers these questions, she really kind of seemed very compelling. She felt like a compelling witness. So obviously, the defense's job is going to be to poke holes in this. Did you want to participate in these freak-offs? Did you have a way of helping set these up? Did you initiate wanting these freak-offs in some instances when Diddy was sick, or other instances as well too? And so today was definitely a very highly anticipated day. As far as the tone just in the courtroom, I think a lot of people were just kind of wanting to know what was going to happen next. So as far as just who was inside that courtroom today, it looked a little different than it has, on day 1 and even a little bit into day 2. In that, we had Karen Agnifilo inside that courtroom today. She is obviously married to Mark Agnifilo. You had Diddy's mother, Janice Combs, in the courtroom. His sons, Christian Combs, Quincy Brown, Justin Combs, all came into the courtroom today. Notably, the daughters, again, not inside that courtroom today. Chance's mother, who's been inside that courtroom, also wasn't there today. Neither was Justin's mother inside that courtroom. So it was a little different than we've seen, on prior days, especially for opening statements, as well as even into day 2. As far as those who were there to support Cassie, it was still the same as it has been the other couple of days she's been testifying. Her husband, Alex Fine, was inside that courtroom. Cassie's brother was inside that courtroom, as well as Cassie's mother and her attorney, Doug Wigder. As far as even when Cassie came into the courtroom today, you would think that maybe she would appear nervous or just a little shaken, depending on, what to expect really from what the cross-examination would look like. But she appeared very cool, calm, and collected, just similar to how she has been on the stand these last couple of days. She just walked up to the witness stand. The judge reaffirmed that she is still under oath, and so she just sat there. And even when Ana Maria Estevao was asking her question, she, for the most part, appeared cool, calm, and collective. Her tone was still the same, even during, as far as comparing it to her direct testimony, where, she was very soft-spoken. There were times, she wasn't saying yes or anything like that. Instead, she was saying yep or mm-hmm. And she just appeared, again, very soft-spoken. She appeared that she didn't seem nervous, at least from what I could see of her. Of course, there were some moments where you could kind of feel that she was uncomfortable, especially when it came to these graphic text messages that were being displayed, but she didn't feel comfortable necessarily reading them out loud. And it makes a lot of sense, right? This was, it appeared that these were private messages between people who were dating, people who were together for a years-long period. But just keep in mind, even to now, she is married to somebody else. And, her husband was in that courtroom. And so I could tell that there was a little uncomfy moments when it came to especially some of those graphic tests, or those graphic text messages that were being displayed in court today. But as far as the tone goes, just overall, it appeared just kind of like another day in court. I'm assuming that, Cassie kind of knew what to expect as far as where the defense would go, what type of questions that they would ask her, knowing that they would try to poke holes into her credibility. But again, she appeared cool, calm, and collected while on the stand. No emotional moments or anything like that. No points where she appeared visibly agitated or angry. Just, for the most part, asking clarifying questions. Can you repeat that? Can you ask it a different way? Can you talk about what time frame this was? Oh, I don't remember these text messages. And so that was kind of most of the tone throughout most of the cross-examination today.
So before we get into the substance of what the cross-examination was about, there are two other groups of people I were curious about how they were reacting throughout the day. How were the jurors reacting during the cross-examination from what you could see? And how was Diddy reacting during the cross-examination by his defense counsel?
As far as I could see from the jurors today, they seemed at some points a little bored. It seemed at some points they're kind of wondering what's happening next. I think even when the text messages were shown, a lot of them were very much analyzing them. A lot of them had direct focus onto the computer screen in front of them, just so that way they could read all the messages, even the more graphic, sexually explicit messages. I saw there were sometimes some jurors were doing, the tennis match look, where they were either looking at Cassie, who was on the witness stand, then looking at Ana Maria Estevao while she was asking the questions, kind of doing a back and forth. Meanwhile, some other jurors were just laser focused on Cassie and just what she had to say and how she responded to the cross-examination today. As far as Diddy goes, Diddy, just like every other day, is very much participating in his defense, very much so passing off notes to his defense attorneys to kind of hand over to Estevao, who was standing up doing the questioning. He very much so was intently looking at either Cassie or the exhibits in front of him, especially when it came to those sexually explicit text messages, or even just the text messages and the emails back and forth with one another. And so just like every other day, Diddy is very much so participating in his defense, because as the defense has pointed out a number of times, that Cassie is a very critical witness to the case. Mark Agnifilo said she is probably the most key witness in this case, somebody that, they wanted to make sure that they were doing a thorough cross-examination of her, because Diddy's life somewhat depends on this, because, they were making the point that he's facing a life sentence if he's convicted. And so they wanted to make sure that they were asking every single question that they needed to ask. Do I think that was necessarily accomplished? I'm sure we'll get to that in just a second. But for the most part, as far as Diddy goes today, he was definitely participating like usual.
Yeah, and look, she is the number one witness. What do I mean by that? She's the star witness. She starts at the start of this trial. I believe this case rises and falls with her testimony. She is making up a number of the counts that he's facing right now: racketeering, sex trafficking. Her testimony would help support those, and also help support transportation to engage in prostitution. The prosecution needs her to testify, which is why I believe one of the reasons they want her to testify so early is because she's 8.5 months, 9 months pregnant. They got to make sure she gets on the stand before something happens. Now, you mentioned the text messages. This day was filled with text messages. Elizabeth, I'm going to ask you what we learned about these text messages. I'll leave it to you how graphic you want to get about them. If they're I mean, depending upon what the value is, but what were the text messages? What were the value of the text messages? What was the defense doing with these text messages? And by the way, emails too. So communications between Combs and Ventura. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, it was a lot of messages today, a lot of things that were read inside that courtroom. First, starting off with messages that, first with Ana Maria Estevao asking Cassie, so you love Diddy? She said yes. And he loved you? She said yes. You called him Sean. You knew the real Sean. And Cassie said, can you repeat? And then along the lines answered the question that, she knew the Sean that other people didn't see. When they started getting into the email correspondence and text correspondence, they went all the way back to 2008. One email that said, I'm a very lucky woman, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase this email because it was a lot going on. Cassie said, I'm a very lucky woman. I miss you, and I'd fly wherever you needed me to. I love you. And then she signed it off, Cass. They showed a 2009 email that Diddy had written to Cassie, and this was the baby girl and the pop email correspondent and nicknames that they had for one another. Diddy said, I love you so much, it makes me cry. And then Cassie responded, you hungry, pop, and so I think what the defense was trying to do, at least with these initial messages, is just kind of show that there was love and there was affection there. But just think about these time frames and these dates. This was around the time that the two had first started dating, and I felt like it kind of played into what she had said under her direct testimony, that she did care about Diddy, that she did love him. She's been very honest about that that she felt like the two were in love, especially at the beginning of her relationship. There was one message from 2010. Cassie wrote, going to sleep so tomorrow will be faster, and kind of saying tomorrow will be faster so I can see you soon. Diddy responded, I love you so much. I never knew it could be like this. Cassie responded, I'm so happy. We're so in love. There was another message, this one from the year prior. Cassie saying, I love you so much. It made me feel like I can't wait until we just don't care anymore. And Cassie was pretty much saying that this was because she wanted to be open about the relationship, because the defense was trying to point out that Cassie and Diddy, for about a 2-year period, they weren't as open with their relationship, and that Cassie essentially just wanted to be public. Again, something that kind of corroborated her under direct testimony, where she said that she just, was in love with him and just wanted to be with him at all points, all the time. A lot of just I love you back and forth. Again, just kind of trying to establish that these two were in love, that it wasn't forced or fraud or coerced or anything like that. Then we get to a message around August 5th of 2009. Diddy asked, when do you want to freak off? Cassie said, I'm ready to freak off, LOL. Diddy responded, you tell me the date, you choose. And then I'm paraphrasing right here. She had responded, I feel like a Friday would be best. Diddy responded, also paraphrasing here, Friday it is. Maybe we can get Jules here. Jules was an escort that they had used very often in their freak offs, according to her testimony. He was brought up a number of times, and notably he was the escort that was inside that hotel room during the 2016 Intercontinental Hotel incident. There were other messages that went into, Diddy had a subject line that said, what are you thinking about? And then Cassie responded in a very kind of sexually explicit way that I'm not going to repeat on air. You could definitely feel like I was kind of peeking into what their history was like, especially in those intimate moments, and how the two would correspond about wanting to be with each other in an intimate way. And so a lot of those messages were displayed in front of the jury. The jury saw them. Us in the gallery, we saw these messages as well too. There was a 2009 email that Diddy had wrote to Cassie saying, I want you to feel safe to let go. And Cassie wrote, I like that. I want to give you the same. In order to be more open with the things that we do in bed, I need to feel safe like home, like this is my husband, and this is the only man that will ever have this aggressive / sexual side of me. I'm nervous. I'm just the girlfriend that you get your fantasies off with, and that I just don't get that other part. And then she wrote ... anymore, at least. And she kind of, at least least to me and my perspective, appeared a little apprehensive about doing these freak-offs. She was asked by the defense, do you have a fear that you guys wouldn't go public, you guys being Cassie and Diddy? And she said, I guess she thought about this. Again, this was around that 2009 timeframe when the two were still kind of under wraps there. But she said that the freak-offs were kind of an integral part of her relationship, and that essentially she just wanted more. There was a part where they had talked about her 21st birthday. Her 21st birthday is pretty important because that was the first time the two had kissed. That's the first time that she had kissed Diddy, because remember, she had met him 2 years prior to that time. She said that this was again at her birthday. Big names, like a name that we had seen in the People and Places list from jury selection. Dallas Austin was at her that birthday party. Britney Spears was at that birthday party, and they were all brought by Diddy. She was asked about her financial situation around that time, and she said essentially she was doing well. She was, modeling. She was doing other things, and then they kind of touched base a little bit about her prior relationship even before Diddy, and that was with a producer named Ryan Leslie. And around this time frame, because Cassie was still in a relationship with Ryan, at this time the defense was trying to paint it as, when you had met Ryan, he was 10 years older than you at this point of time. And I had kind of looked it up. The Diddy and Ryan Leslie aren't necessarily close in age. I think Ryan Leslie's still in his mid-40s, whereas Diddy's in his mid-50s. So there's a little bit there, but I could kind of see where the defense was trying to go and try to paint it as that you kind of get with older producers, with older men that could possibly kind of help you with your career. Then we saw an email from 2007 where Cassie had wrote, we really had 1 week of each other just together, and I can say it's been the best and the worst. The defense asked her about her relationship with Diddy. Has it always been complicated? And she kind of affirmed that a little bit. She said she thought Diddy at first was actually more interested in her friend Carrie Morgan, somebody that's been brought up a number of times during the testimony. And so as far as a lot of these messages, part of it, when I was sitting inside the gallery today, I was kind of like, where is this going? They were just reading text after text after text. It was bunches of pages, to the point I think the judge was kind of like, why are we, we need to find like a better system of getting Cassie to read these messages so that way there's not a holdup, because it was just so much messages to the point where sometimes you were trying to connect the dots and wondering what's happening. And so the presentation was a little messy on my end, at least from what I could see, that I was just kind of like, where is this going? And there were just so many points that I felt like they could talk about instead of these messages, but it seemed like they wanted to get in front of these messages, provide context that Cassie was actually in love, that at times that she had set up these freak-offs even on her own, at times when even Diddy was sick. And so these messages were just all over the place, and at points I was just kind of like, where is this going? Because it really was so much. So I don't know how the jury felt listening to all of these today too.
Week one of P. Diddy's criminal trial is in the books. Compelling opening statements, surveillance footage of a savage beating, photos of alleged injuries, and disturbing accounts of alleged sexual exploitation, abuse, and humiliation. A lot for the jury to think about. But after week one, who's winning? Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, it has certainly been quite the week in the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Actually, it was the first week. It was week one in a trial where he's facing racketeering, sex trafficking, prostitution charges, a trial that could end possibly in his conviction and possibly a sentence of life in prison. That's what we're talking about. Opening statements, witness testimony, pictures, videos. There was a lot the jury saw so far in this trial. Here's the question, though. After week one, who's winning? Who's winning the case? Now, obviously, I have to give the caveat. It is impossible to know that exactly. It's impossible to know what the jury is thinking about. But from a legal point of view, I want to try to dig into who may be winning. And we're going to go through all of the major moments this past week. And to do that, I want to bring on former Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Aronberg, who I love having on. First thing I'm going to ask Dave, though, is before I even get into the Diddy conversation, Dave, because you are a multifaceted, multi-talented individual, tell everybody where they can find you and all the different programs you're hosting.
Jesse, it's always good to be with you, man. I have a show on Legal AF, so that's on YouTube. It's called Legal AF. I do periodic case reviews, intersection of law and politics, and occasionally true crime. So find me there. Also, I'm the managing partner of Dave Ehrenberg Law. But most importantly, I'm a guest on Sidebar.
There you go. That is the most important. All right. So, Dave, I am not going to ask you yet. I'm not going to ask you right now. I'm going to save it for the end who you think won week one. We'll talk about that. And yes, I know that rhymes. That'll be my last question to you, but I want to go through this step by step. So to be clear about something, at the time of this recording, this is before the testimony wrapped up on Friday. So just keep that in mind. But we have a great sense of the whole week in general. So let's start off opening statements on Monday. Now, it started with Assistant United States Attorney Emily Johnson explaining to the jury that Combs allegedly committed 20 years of crimes and that he had a team to help him. Bodyguards, chiefs of staff, assistants. These are crimes like kidnapping, arson, drugs, sex crimes. In fact, here's a quote. For years, the defendant used his inner circle and his company's resources to sexually exploit multiple women, including women he forced and manipulated into having sex with male escorts, meaning men who the defendant paid to have sex with women while he watched. No matter what, the defendant and his inner circle made sure he got everything he wanted. Many times that involved committing crimes together and then covering up those crimes. She went on to say, let me be very clear on this next point. This case is not about a celebrity's private sexual preferences. The evidence will show that the sexual conduct at issue in this case was coercive and criminal because the defendant made women have sex when they did not want to because he threatened them. He drugged, he lied, and he even used violence to make them do it. And she talked about the multiple alleged victims in this case, like Cassandra Ventura, who we're going to talk about a little bit later because she testified this week. An unidentified alleged victim known as Jane, a single mother that prosecutors said this person was coerced into freak-offs. There's also Mia, Combs' apparent former employee, who will apparently also testify that she was allegedly sexually assaulted. So, Dave, I've kind of summarized it here from the prosecution. Did they deliver in their opening statement? And I know opening statements are not evidence, but man, oh man, are they important. Tell me, do you think the prosecution delivered?
Yes, I thought they were great. I thought that the prosecution did what they needed to do in the opening statement. I thought it was really important for them to distinguish between weird sexual conduct, which the jurors probably just can't even comprehend, this kind of freak-off stuff, from the actual crimes here. Because it is Diddy's defense that, hey, sex isn't illegal. Domestic violence is illegal, but he's not being charged for that here. So at worst, this is a domestic violence case. Kick it back to state court, let them deal with it. Case dismissed. So I thought the prosecution did a really good job in keeping the jurors' eye on the ball.
The only thing I'll say is, and I did a previous sidebar on it, it felt to me they spent a lot of time explaining to this jury why this is a crime. And let me tell you, racketeering, sex trafficking, very complicated. I try to explain it to people about what this case is about. They can't understand it, and that's no fault to them. But when I try to explain, oh, okay, look, you're dealing with sex trafficking, so you're dealing with somebody who was allegedly harbored, transported, maintained for the purposes of commercial sex work, something of value is being exchanged, and force, fraud, or coercion were used, that's confusing. When I mentioned racketeering conspiracy, that there was a criminal agreement to further racketeering activity, a pattern of illegal activity, that there was a criminal enterprise that had a common purpose. There were all these alleged crimes they committed, Sean Combs at the top, kidnapping, arson, forced labor, sex trafficking, bribery, obstruction. That's not easy to digest. I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's not like a classic case where you have a shadowy organization that's kidnapping girls from another country, taking them to another country, and selling them off to the highest bidder. As disgusting as that is, that's not quite what we have here. Do you feel that the prosecution has a little bit of an uphill battle where they have to keep explaining why this is a crime?
Yes, and that's why they took so much time to do that in the opening, and I thought that was smart to do so. There's an old adage in politics, when you're explaining, you're losing. Not quite the same in the law, but it is true that if you have to spend all your time trying to explain complex charges, that's not ideal. You would rather just make it like, hey, we all know why this is a crime, obviously, and the stuff is horrific, but they do have the shock factor on their side. And just the images and the descriptions and the baby oil and all this stuff that comes out, the urination and all this stuff has got to be so shocking that I do think that helps the prosecution. The other thing that helps the prosecution is that their key witness, Cassie, and I know we'll get to it, is 8 months pregnant. I mean, you want a sympathetic witness? Put someone 8 months pregnant on the witness stand talking about how she was sexually assaulted. It's good for the prosecution.
Real quick, before we go to the defense's opening, are you saying that there could be a chance the jury decides this case not on the black letter law, not on meeting the elements, but because they're so angry and they're so inflamed at what they're seeing day in and day out that they want to hold Combs accountable? Because he could have sexually assaulted Cassandra Ventura. He could have beaten Cassandra Ventura. It doesn't necessarily mean it's sex trafficking or racketeering, and I'm going to get to the defense's opening statement, but I agree with you. There are really despicable things that are being alleged here, and again, we'll get to her testimony. But are you saying there's a chance the jury could be persuaded by emotion?
Absolutely. Jurors come from their own world experiences, their life experiences, and they come in here and they hear about the celebrity doing these shocking things. And yeah, they may just say, let's punish this dude. On the other hand, the defense is aware of that too, and they have the same strategy. If you can tarnish the key witness, then maybe the jurors have said, to hell with both of them. A plague on both their houses.
So as we know, jurors are not supposed to make a decision based on emotion, but you said they're human beings. It happens. So let's keep that in mind. Now let's go to the defense. So the defense opening statement was from Tenny Garagos, and she characterized the case as the following. Quote, Sean Combs is a complicated man, but this is not a complicated case. This case is about love, jealousy, infidelity, and money. This case is about voluntary adult choices made by capable adults and consensual relationships. This case is about those real-life relationships, and the government is trying to turn those relationships into a racketeering case, a prostitution case, and a sex trafficking case. It will not work. Now, Garagos emphasized that this is about Combs' private sex life, swinger parties, that yes, Combs was violent, that yes, he had a temper, but domestic violence is not sex trafficking. Dave, turn it over to you. Did the defense, did they do a proper job of at least trying to say to the jury, hey, listen, what you're about to hear, doesn't amount to the crimes that he is being charged with, and everything was consensual?
Yeah, I thought this case has been really well lawyered up to now. I really do think both sides did what they had to do. I thought the defense focused the jury on the actual charges. It's interesting how they said that it's a complicated relationship, but not a complicated case. That goes to what you were saying earlier when you're explaining, like the prosecution was, all the details and why this is so complicated, then yeah, that's tough. That's trouble for the prosecution. The defense is saying, we've got simplicity on our side. All you have to know is there are a lot of relationships like this. They don't end up in federal court. So I do think both sides did what they needed to do, but it's the testimony that leads me, and I'm not going to say which side won the week yet, but it's the testimony that leads me to conclude which side is ahead.
Oh, I wonder which side. I wonder which side. All right, well, here's the thing. The fact that they owned up to the violence, right? They didn't explain away the 2016 tape of Combs appearing to beat up Cassandra Ventura. They said it's indefensible, although I'll get into that a little bit later because I think they almost provided a defense to it. But they said, look, he was angry, he beat her up, but these aren't state-level charges. These are very specific elements. I think this case is all going to come down to closing arguments, personally. I think it's all going to come down to closing arguments and how it's articulated. But owning up to his violence, that's a bold strategy, and I wonder if that could potentially backfire.
Yeah, they were saying that it's over jealousy, and you can see how he's grabbing at her cell phone, and it's a cell phone issue, not a human trafficking issue. It had nothing to do with the freak off, whereas Cassie was saying it's because of the freak off. So that's important, but the video speaks for itself. I mean, people lie, video does not. And Diddy forever had denied everything against anyone until that video came out. Then he had to come clean and say, okay, that happened, but nothing else did. Everything else is a lie, but that happened, and here's why it happened. That video is going to be etched in the jurors' minds. It is so powerful, so devastating to see her there lying on the floor after a brutal beating. I do think that emotion can get involved. Yeah. And if jurors are confused about the charges, state versus federal, they may just default back to that video and say, I don't like this guy, guilty.